Daniel, I want to move on because the time that's in it, they're about to start the London Olympics, and that takes us back 40 years to Munich in 1972, a time when anybody who was around is never going to forget. What's your memory of Munich in 72?
Shocking. I think it was a shocking experience that such a horrible thing happened in such an international atmosphere of cooperation. You know, it's interesting, even playing sports or meeting people in conferences or all these things, people get over the international conflicts and they're able to talk to one another. And for terrorists to come and murder all of those people was a shocking thing. I think it was a shocking thing for the international community. And I can't believe that giving those sportsmen who died a minute's silence would be such an issue for the Olympic Committee. But if that's the way it is, that's fine.
Do you remember it? Because I tend to remember, I was 21 or 22 at the time, that previous to that we had sport and we had politics. Yes, I know there were South African things like that. But to me, Munich brought about a loss of innocence in that sense of the word, that these two came head on and they were entangled. Well, they were. It was a bloody mess, wasn't it?
And it still is. Yeah. That's why there's no minute silence, because they came as sportsmen, even though they represented Israel. They came as sportsmen, international sportsmen, who came to do something together that was positive and special and fun, and they were murdered. And not to give them the respect of a minute's silence is also politicizing it. So I think the politics and sport is definitely mixed together, and it hasn't changed.
Something, and we don't often hear about it in retrospect, but again, if I go back to 67, 72, 73, and I don't want to get too controversial about this, but I never saw those guys at Munich, I never saw the guys in Black September, any of these organizations as doing it for the establishment of a Palestinian state. It was purely anti-Israeli or anti-Jew. What's your memory of that period of time, Daniel?
It was a period where there was always a threat. We saw afterwards, a few years later, I remember the Entebbe experience, where the Jews were separated on the plane from the non-Jews. It wasn't just the Israelis, the Jews were separated from the non-Jews. So I think it became, as time has gone by, a lot of people who are anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish hid behind the facade of anti-Israeli, and still do, very much so. And in actual fact, they're anti-Jewish. I mean, if you look at people who support Hamas, who call for the genocide of all Jews all over the world, that's what their charter calls for, the genocide of the Jews. So if you look at anybody who supports them, well, then you should ask yourself, why are they supporting a group like that that calls for the genocide of a people? So
would you see, as many people would say, that the whole issue of a so-called Palestinian state, as it's being presented at the moment, is literally little more than a screen for some of these actions?
For many people, it's an opportunity to destroy the Jewish people again. For many people, they are generally interested in having a peace. I think that I believe that a peace can come about. I live and work with Jewish and Arab Israelis. I live and work with Palestinians from the territories. I've done a lot of humanitarian work with them. I believe that there is always a way to live in peace. I think that most people just want to get up in the morning, educate their kids, feed their kids, go to work, come home, and live a normal life. So I think the evolution. There's a whole change going on in the Middle East at the moment, and I think that one of the possibilities it may happen is that the populations are beginning to wake up. They used to be able to have the dictators, I should say, were able to hold the people together by the hatred of Israel, but this glue doesn't work anymore. And I think that internet has spread so much information now that people are beginning to understand. They're getting much more educated, and they're beginning to understand that this is not the way.
Well, this is one of the things we found interesting here is that the so-called Arab Spring how low down the priorities were Palestinian state.
That's
itself.
right.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
If I could just ask you about it, because you're coming back here, although you grew up in Ireland, you're actually coming back as an Israeli tourist. Now, Israelis are probably the one group on this planet that have separate issues as a tourist, whether it's you're going to Mumbai or whether you're going to Bulgaria. It is what I was discussing earlier, the Israeli tourist experience. It's unique in that sense of the word. How do you deal with that? Do you think, yes, there could be danger, but is it something that you have to take what we would call automatic precautions, but don't dwell on it?
We would take automatic precautions, but don't dwell on it, but we're aware. I think that the amazing thing, is that if I go to Mumbai, or if I come to Ireland, and I go to Mumbai as I'm invited to Mumbai, I go to operate there, I go to teach there. And if I go, the people are so friendly to us and accept us, and not just, by the way, the Hindus, the Muslims. So, if I go to Mumbai, I have a Muslim who takes me around Mumbai to show me around. And they're very, very open and friendly and very happy that we're there. People don't know what goes on under the carpet, and I think that most people are actually very friendly to us. When I go to international conferences, medical conferences, the people that crowd around me to talk to me are the Arabs, are people from Arab countries, and I have many, many good friends from Arab countries who are doctors, and people don't realise this. So that there's actually a lot of cooperation and speech and friendliness that we wouldn't imagine that's there. So you actually get a lot of positive experiences from it as well, not just negative.
Do you see any, albeit subconsciously, to give you an example of what happened in Bulgaria last week, dreadful event. Now, most people reading that would think, oh, well, there's one crazy guy and he's got a backpack and he did something dreadful. But I was explaining this to somebody last night, that there's basically an industry behind this person, that there's probably at least 30 people who are involved in this one act.
There's a state that's involved.
Of course, but even putting if you like, a project like that together, and I hate to use such a bland term, there's a significant resource, and all the media reports is the final act. Do you think that the media should actually be going into more detail to explain not only why something like that takes place, but even how? Because
absolutely,
it changes people's minds when they see what's behind it.
Well, we could look at the Second World War. The Second World War started with the Jews, but it ended up affecting the whole of Europe, and millions died. Many more millions of people died than just the Jews. So even if you don't particularly care for the Jews, you should think about yourself, because this Iran-sponsored terrorism, which started in Bulgaria, will also hit Europeans. And I'd remind you that there were many European tourists murdered in Egypt, in other places as well. And I don't think it's going to be too long before it affects other people. So I think that even from a selfish point of view, people should actually look at why it happened, who caused it to happen, and what should you do about it.
Sure. Syria is hugely prominent in the news at the moment. Syria and Israel technically are still at a state of war, so again, technically Israel could go across the border and at the very least do something about the chemical weapons. On the one hand, it must create some sort of confused thinking to a certain degree, because clearly Israel must welcome the departure of Assad, because that would change the geopolitics in the region. But yet at the same time, there's no guarantee that would be any smoother than, say, the Greeks leaving the euro. While the potential outcome is magnificent from Israel, the pitfalls along the way must be very scary.
I think it's a time of instability, but I don't think that Assad has been a vicious dictator for years. It was ignored by the West. The father murdered 30,000 people in Hama in the 1970s, but nobody paid attention to that. It wasn't even talked about, and he flattened the city. So I don't think that things particularly changed as in terms of the dictatorship in Syria. It'll change the status of who's governing, and I don't think, in terms of enmity, I don't know that it'll make much difference. I think the people that it's going to affect the most will be Iran.
That's yes, but
Iran and Hezbollah are going to be affected the most by it, because Syria is the conduit. They're the place that bring all of the arms to the Hezbollah, which is a state-sponsored terrorist group, and they also house the fathers and thinkers of Hamas, which is a state-sponsored. It's basically Israel has Iran on its border with Hamas. So I think that the big losers from Syria will be the Iranians, because it will be a big blow to their state-sponsored terrorism.
But wouldn't that make them more dangerous?
The Iranians?
Yes, I would have said that potentially makes them more reckless in the short term.
Well, that's maybe why they're starting to blow up buses in Bulgaria, and maybe in Ireland and in England and in France and in Belgium, we should be looking to see what they're going to be planning there as well, because they're going to be a lot more active, yeah.
But in the short term, while bus bombs and tragedies like that are dreadful, in the somewhat more immediate term, it's nothing compared to a nuclear weapon.
No, well, Assad tried to bring a nuclear weapon just 3 or 4 years ago. We shouldn't forget that.
Yes. Well,
so he was a very extreme man, somebody who would introduce nuclear weapons and bring in nuclear rockets is a very extreme man.